Everybody, welcome to Dangerous Ideas, the show where I tear apart the garbage the mainstream media is spouting out to the world, as well as bring you the stories the mainstream media would generally never bring you. Thank you for being here. Today, we're going to get into, is this a hinge in history? Is this a pivotal turning point from which we can and possibly will not want to ever go back? And there's a good argument to be made that what's happening right now is a major turning point in the history of, we'll be very specific. The human species, the history of humans, humanity, as it were. But before we get to that, let's just bring you up to date. And by the way, please click thumbs up and all that good stuff while we're going here. I am very suppressed. Actually, before I get into anything, I will mention that we just hit 50,000 on YouTube, my new YouTube channel, after they banned the other one around the world. And that's exciting because when I first created that channel like 3 years ago or something, I got about 40,000 subscribers in the first couple of weeks. Then they basically froze it or near froze it for years. So I was in the 40s for years. And now we just cracked 50. Hey, thank you guys for being a part of that. But okay, so I just wanted to bring you a little bit up to date. I mean, you probably know the mainstream media, as awful as they do, they're not denying that there are atrocities happening right now in Gaza. They're not denying the situation that is just, I've run out of adjectives, horrific, just heart-wrenching. But even The Guardian, which does a lot of propaganda itself, is saying that the UN warns of Gaza starvation as concerns rise about safety in the south, which has been less attacked than the north of Gaza. Most of the thousands upon thousands of bombs that have been dropped on Gaza have been in the north, and Israel has been telling everyone to evacuate to the south because they're committing ethnic cleansing and they're trying to get everyone out of Gaza so that Israel can take over that entire area, and as well as the oil reserves that are off the shore there in Gaza, massive oil reserves that have been found. And it's really completing the ethnic cleansing job that Israel started decades ago. So they want this to happen. They want everyone to clear out south. They're trying to get Egypt to take all the refugees, which Egypt has refused, not because they don't want to be helpful to refugees, but because Egypt does not want to facilitate the ethnic cleansing being perpetrated by Israel. And also later in this hour, just to let you know, I'm going to get to several stories, but also towards the end of the hour, I'm going to get to more, because it's the 60th anniversary, more about the JFK cover-up. And today we'll be focusing on the assassination of his mistress that happened roughly a year after JFK met his untimely demise. And many people don't even know about that. And yet there's been many books written about it. Much of it was in the mainstream media, not maybe some of it that I'm going to tell you, but a lot of it you can verify from mainstream media from the time. But most people don't even know about her or about the killing of her in broad daylight. Anyway, since it's the 60th anniversary, I feel like it's time to go over some of this. So I'll be bringing that to you as well later in the hour. But let's focus on these updates. The UN has warned that Gaza civilians face the immediate possibility of starvation amid mounting concerns about Israeli plans to expand military operations. That's a nice way of saying genocide in parts of the south where people have sought refuge from fighting. Fuel shortages on Friday halted aid shipments and blacked out communications across the strip. I wonder why Israel would want to black out communications across the entire strip amongst millions of innocent civilians. Oh, maybe so they can't be uploading videos of atrocities on a minute-by-minute basis. It hasn't stopped, luckily, a lot of the atrocities from still getting out to us. But your mainstream media, of course, is doing everything they can to make sure you don't notice or care about the atrocities that are being done on a second-by-second basis. Fuel shortages on Friday halted I did that part. The UN said its trucks could not move and it could not coordinate deliveries. By the way, over 100 UN workers have already been murdered by Israel. Palestinian network operators said they could no longer power the phone and internet systems. Fuel shortages have also effectively shut down water treatment and sewage systems, leading health authorities to warn about the spread of infectious diseases. Now, of course, all of these things, you and I hear them and we go, oh, that's horrific. Well, there's diseases and people dying. The hospitals are can't even treat the ill and can't even deliver babies. And we go, that's horrific. And Israel, the Israeli government, the IDF, they go, that's great. That's what they want. They want ethnic cleansing. They want as many to die as possible. They don't want babies to survive. They don't want children to survive. Over 4,000 children, nearly 5,000 children have already been murdered since October 7th by the IDF. Over 11,000 people have been murdered by the IDF, and Israel is cheering it all on. So if you want to see what a real good propaganda looks like, this is just basically repeating what Netanyahu says without any pushback. This is Reuters. Which has done a wonderful job of propaganda throughout much of this. Reuters is saying Israel not successful in its bid to minimize Gaza civilian casualties. Quote unquote, not successful. Oh, have they not been successful in their efforts to minimize Gaza civilian casualties? There's been no effort. Like, the inaccurate title of that would be Israel has no efforts to minimize civilian atrocities. And in fact, occasionally that's been said by IDF on various public airwaves, that they're going more for just sheer numbers rather than accuracy, sheer numbers of death and destruction. That's why you would go after things like hospitals and schools and refugee camps, places they told people they'd be safe, and then they bomb those places. But so here's Israel just repeating what Netanyahu says as if it makes perfect sense, as if he wouldn't lie, as if Israel has made any effort to minimize the civilian casualties. To continue from the Reuters article, Israel is doing all it can to get civilians out of harm's way as it battles Hamas in Gaza, including dropping leaflets warning them to flee. But its attempts to minimize casualties were not successful, quote unquote, Prime Minister Netanyahu said on Thursday. They've made no efforts. And dropping leaflets to tell people to leave because you're going to bomb a hospital or a school or a neighborhood, that is not an effort. That is not A, enough of an effort, but B, you shouldn't be bombing those places to begin with if you're not committing ethnic cleansing, if you're not committing genocide. You don't just, the Nazis handed out pamphlets saying that, Jews should leave. Well, then that makes it fine, everything they did after that. No, it's not how it works. These are all war crimes. They're all illegal under international law, multiple international laws, multiple UN resolutions. It doesn't matter whether you dropped a few pamphlets. It doesn't matter whether you called an apartment building. And by the way, the procedure that Israel does, which they've done many times, is they'll call one person in an apartment building. Let's say there's an apartment building. Let's say it's got 100 families, which many of them probably have more than that. But let's say 100 families. They'll call one person and they get them on the phone. They say, you have 1 hour to get everyone in your building out. Click. And then that person does their best, running up and down the apartment building, trying to get everyone out, trying to get them to believe that this is real and not just another prank call or whatever. And maybe they succeed with a certain number of them, maybe they don't. And then Israel bombs the apartment building and kills whatever, thousands. I mean, not thousands in one strike, but thousands over the past several weeks. And they can, the IDF in Israel will then say, we did what we could to get them to leave. We tried our best. We gave a phone call saying you should leave. It's a joke. It is a joke that they're trying to avoid civilian casualties. It is a joke. And anyone that reports it straight up, like this Reuters article, is just doing the propaganda of the apartheid state of Israel, just spouting this garbage, letting Netanyahu speak his lies, as Israel continues to do something they've been working on and doing for years. As many of you know, Netanyahu went in front of the UN days, like 10 days or something before October 7th. So before this started, right? Went in front of the UN and held up a map talking about how great things were going to be for Israel and everything. And the map had Palestine erased. That is days before October 7th. Netanyahu held up a map in front of the UN with Palestine, with Gaza, with West Bank, all erased, non-existent. And that is what they've been working towards, and they're continuing it right now. And the idea that anyone could deny that, you're denying all of the evidence. It's utterly preposterous. So then he could. Oh, and another point I want to make here when he says that, oh well, we've done our best to minimize civilian casualty. They're also cutting off. They've cut off the water. They've cut off the power. They've cut off the gasoline, which means you can't operate hospitals. You can't drive around and flee. You can't operate, houses for people that are invalid or sick or babies or whatever else. So when and they've cut off the fuel, and they've cut off medical devices getting into and medicines getting into Gaza. So it's not just the bombs. And this is a critical point, because people, I think, look at the bombs that are being dropped and they go, well, the reason Israel is bombing those places is because they're trying to hit the Hamas tunnels under them, which, by the way, even if there were Hamas tunnels under them, you still can't bomb a hospital and a school and everything else. It's still a war crime. It's still illegal under international law. But even so, they claim, well, Israel's trying to get rid of Hamas, and the only way to get rid of them is to drop these bombs. They're also cutting off the water, okay? And the only reason you cut off water and energy and everything else is to try and force people to leave or die. That is the goal. That is the aim. To continue from this article, and this is a quote from Netanyahu, any civilian death is a tragedy. Oh, yeah, I'm sure he is real torn up about this. And he continues, we shouldn't have any because we're doing everything we can to get civilians out of harm's way. Oh, really? Like turning off the water? Like no clean water? Like no the medicines for the disease that is running rampant through these refugee camps because everyone's living on top of each other and has no medicine? He says, we're doing everything we can while Hamas is doing everything they can to keep them in harm's way. Not true. Not true. Okay. Go talk any interview you see with a Palestinian. Ask them how much Hamas has put them in harm's way. Ask them how much Hamas has dragged them into a spot Israel's going to bomb and said, stay here. Zero. There's no Palestinians that are forced to stay somewhere by Hamas. It's just garbage lies. And then Netanyahu continues, we send leaflets. We call them on their cell phones. That's the one call I told you about in an apartment building, telling them to get 100 people to evacuate. And we say leave. And many have left. He then continues, the other thing that I can say is that we'll try to finish the job with minimal civilian casualties. By the way, as I've mentioned, finish the job means eliminate all Palestinians from Gaza. Whether that means force them into tent cities in the Sinai Desert in Egypt, or it means that they died and they were killed by Israel. One or the other. And also in all these deaths, we talk about over 11,000 have been killed, have been murdered by the IDF. That is only counting the ones directly hit by bombs. That is not counting all of the thousands that have died over the past many months due to disease, due to dirty water, due to the fact that preventable diseases cannot be treated in Gaza because they can't get the medicines, because Israel won't let the medicines in. So none of that death and destruction is counted in these numbers. He says we're doing everything we can to minimize civilian casualties, but unfortunately we're not successful, unquote. So this is absolute, just the pinnacle of propaganda being said by Netanyahu, full gaslighting. And here is Reuters just spitting it back to you like it's the truth. Essentially zero pushback in this article, just quoting Netanyahu and trying to get you to believe Netanyahu. Now, they do give the numbers dead. They say at least 11,500 people have been confirmed killed, 4,700 of them children. As I've mentioned before, Gaza, even before October 7th, is 50% children. So Israel's attack is an attack on children. 2/3 of Gaza Strip's population, 2.3 million people, have been made homeless by the war. On Thursday, Israel's Air Force dropped leaflets in parts of South Gaza telling people to evacuate for their own safety. Okay, did you follow that? Dropped leaflets in South Gaza. The way this thing started on October 8th was they told everyone in North Gaza to evacuate south because south was the place they'd be safe. Keep in mind, Gaza is only 25 miles long and 5 miles wide. It's not a big, it's basically a small American town. So they told everyone in North Gaza, evacuate south. A lot have. Many have called it akin to the Trail of Tears. People walking 20 miles to try and get to somewhere safe without they've left their homes, they've left their belongings, they've left everything. They've often left members of their family who have died or they've gotten separated from because they don't have phones anymore because all the power's dead in Gaza. So they fled south, and now leaflets are being dropped on them saying, you need to leave or we're going to bomb you. What do you do if that were you? If you'd taken your family with whatever you could carry of your worldly possessions, marched south for 10, 15 miles, 20 miles, and then you get there and a leaflet rains down saying, flee or we're going to bomb you. Where are you going to flee to? Where are you going to go? Egypt is not letting Gazans in because A, it doesn't want a refugee crisis in Egypt, but more importantly, because they feel they'd be facilitating Israel's ethnic cleansing. Now Israel's doing everything they can to get Egypt to take all these people. They've put in. They're offering them billions in debt relief. They're also threatening them with bombings. They've already bombed the Egyptian border once or twice to show that they're willing to do it. It's horrific. And then, just to bring you a little update on Al-Shifa Hospital, which is the latest hospital that Israel attacked and then sent IDF in. And I've brought you in the past few days, I've brought you updates on what's going on there. Everyone in intensive care or critical condition has died at Al-Shifa Hospital. But just about everyone across the internet, except for your mainstream media, is mocking the IDF for pretending that what they found justifies killing everyone in Al-Shifa Hospital, cutting the power, cutting the water, everything else. And what they've shown people, and I've brought you some of it in previous days, but is they'll show a calendar that has the days of the week in Arabic, and that proves that Hamas was there. They've shown a couple of guns. And that's supposed to be. So here's an image from Al Jazeera of the IDF pointing at a bag with one gun in it, one Kalashnikov or something, which I've heard others report that if you ever been to Gaza, Kalashnikovs are not uncommon. And I've been to Israel before, back when I was a teenager, and they weren't uncommon there either. It was basically security forces, not just police, but of any kind. So let's say hired security for a hotel or something, would be standing there with these automatic guns, Uzis or something, around their necks, just as a show of force. So they're very common. So it is the security for a hospital would, of course, have these if everyone else has them. So it really proves nothing. But as I made the point in the past few days, it doesn't matter. They could find the most sophisticated control center you've ever goddamn seen underneath that hospital. It could be the deck of the Starship Enterprise, and it wouldn't matter. You still can't bomb a hospital. You still can't cut off the water. You still can't cut off the gas. That's not how any kind of moral universe works, that you can just kill everyone in a hospital and literally babies died, and then just claim it's fine because you found a command center underneath. But people continue to mock that the IDF has really not found anything. To continue from Al Jazeera, Israeli troops have raided the coastal enclave's largest medical facility. Israel's long claimed that Hamas was using the hospital as a command center. The Israeli army has said the raid has helped it find evidence to back up its assertion. What was found in the hospital? The Israeli military released a video, but the video showed 3 duffel bags in an MRI lab that had an assault rifle, grenades, Hamas uniforms, and flak jackets. Additionally, the Army showed assault rifles with ammunition clips and a laptop. And they said these weapons have no business in a hospital. But as I've mentioned, every hospital in Gaza would have had security that has these things. And then what is Hamas? What about the Hamas tunnels and military command? They've shown no proof of that. Yet more than 24 hours after the raid started, the Israeli army has not shown evidence that either Hamas-run tunnels or military command center are underneath the hospital. So, but again, because I don't know, tomorrow they may come out with great footage of a Hamas command center. It doesn't really matter to me. You're still committing war crimes. It wouldn't matter if they found a command center, as they say. People continue to protest across the entire United States, across the world, against these atrocities, against this genocide. I've brought you videos on many of my live streams this week. By the way, I'm live 4 days a week. If you guys are enjoying this, please join me Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. But I brought you many videos of the activists that have been standing up and protest, blocking roads, blocking facilities, blocking government meetings and things like that, including the banks that help fund these things, the weapons contractors that are facilitating these things. This absolutely is, considering the amount that the U.S. does to make sure that Israel can do all of the killing it wants. This is a genocide being perpetrated by the U.S. It is not just Israel. It is Israel and the U.S. These are the 70% of the bombs being dropped by Israel are American made, are Lockheed Martin, are Raytheon, are General Dynamics, and much of those is funded by the U.S. Budget. The U.S. sends quote unquote aid. So this brings me to the main story I want to get here, which is how this is a pivotal point in history. We are witnessing very likely what Patrick Lawrence called in Sheer Post the hinge of a history. Now, I don't really love that term because when I think hinge, I think stone. Okay, I think Stonehenge. I don't think history hinge. And a history hinge sounds like it's a circle of rocks that changed history, which that bugs me. And then of course I picture the Spinal Tap, the movie where they have the 2-foot Stonehenge, and I think it's a real problem. And Patrick Lawrence needs to get on his shit. But no, in all seriousness, of course, they're referring to hinge like on a door hinge that is a 90-degree turn and changes the trajectory. So I want to read some of this article and comment as I go. But it is an excellent article. It's over at Sheer Post by Patrick Lawrence. And it details why this moment right now, there's no going back. And it is perhaps a major change, a major right angle in history. Bombing hospitals was, just a few days ago, an undeclared red line the Israeli Defense Forces dared not cross without provoking international disgust and condemnation. As of the writing of this article, the IDF is bombing hospitals, and I read its soldiers are shooting patients, invalids among them, as they attempt to evacuate buildings soon to be demolished. There is disgust and condemnation now, and they find expression not only on the streets of many cities, but also in governing circles. Axios reported Monday that an internal State Department memo, I covered this as well this week, signed by 100 officials at state and its aid agency, USAID, accuses President Biden of lying about Israel's military campaign in Gaza and of complicity in war crimes. And the reason that's such a shock is because the people that work inside the U.S. government rarely stand up and say anything against U.S. government policy because they have chosen to work as part of this empire and to continue U.S. hegemony. And yet this is even going beyond the line that they have, which before now we thought was kind of non-existent, but here it is. To continue from the article, these are signs, and he gives other examples, but these are signs on the surface of much deeper movements a few meters down in our civilization's soil. Things are gradually coming apart in consequence of Israel's savagery and America's abetment of it. Suggested over the weekend, we have reached a hinge in history, outcomes wildly uncertain. This is clearly, as Chancellor Scholz of Germany said, an epic changing moment, a time of major change in a new direction in history. 500 years of global dominance by the Euro-American culture, the Atlantic culture, has come to an end. And he's about to explain why this is not just another atrocity committed by the Euro-American culture, why it is an atrocity that is very well may mark the beginning of the end for that culture and for settler colonialism. He says, what we are seeing at the moment in Palestine is the end of settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is a phenomenon of the last 2 centuries or so, and it is always accompanied by genocide. Most of you understand what settler colonialism is. It is deciding you as a people are better than another people, and therefore you go and you plant your flag and you say, all the rest of you need to get the frack out of here or else we will kill you. And generally there is mass killing. We saw it with the Native Americans. We saw it with just about everywhere the British Empire went. There was followed by genocide. We saw it with where the U.S. has gone in many cases has been followed by genocide, ethnic cleansing. And even if there's not genocide or ethnic cleansing, it is usually some level of mass killing that then gets the local people, the indigenous people, the native people, the people that were there before to move away or give up and say, okay, you are the rulers of this area. We have no choice because you have bigger guns. So that is kind of the definition, my definition, if you will, of settler colonialism. To continue from the article, the U.S. has gone too far this time. That is how Ajamu Baraka, who I've interviewed many times, very, very profound and great man. He ran for vice president in the Green Party a while back, and he runs the Black Alliance for Peace. That's how he put it the other day. The U.S. has gone too far. Every commentator making this argument is pithily to the point. The U.S. has gone too far countless times since assuming its imperial pretensions, of course. And, many of you know the U.S. I couldn't even sit here and try and list all the times the U.S. has, quote unquote, gone too far. He says from the Spanish-American War onward. But we are watching genocidal savagery on television once again, as we watched Hamlets burn and rice paddies run red during the Vietnam War. Although the difference is back then, there was very little coverage of the actual visuals of the genocide that the U.S. was committing against Vietnam. There was very little, eventually it started to trickle out. Then you had coverage in kind of indie magazines like Ramparts magazine, which, who the editor of Ramparts magazine was for a while, Robert Scheer, this is his website, Scheer Post. So you see a connection there. But by the way, Ramparts, and this shows how the ripples of change you can create with just a few little bits of information getting out there, because the article in Ramparts magazine that was written that showed the true atrocities of the Vietnam War, that article was then read by someone with the name of Martin Luther King Jr. Not sure if you heard of him. I think he's going to be something, that whippersnapper, one day. But he read that article and it forced him, not that he was probably always kind of against the Vietnam War, but he wasn't really talking about it as much. He was focused on other things. And seeing that article forced him to start speaking out about the horrors of the Vietnam War. Anyway, to continue from this article, if the U.S. never fully recovered from its merciless violence in Indochina, the damage will be permanent this time. The obscenity it sponsors at the hands of a crazed apartheid regime is simply too full frontal. Real-time inhumanity will prove America's undoing, to say nothing of apartheid Israel's undoing. These are very likely the final days, and of course, final days could mean years and years, but the final days of the Israeli apartheid regime. America's so-called moral authority has been fiction for decades. I would say since the 1945 victories, but it is now in something close to free fall collapse. I'd say America let go of the moral authority the moment we dropped atomic bombs on Japan. That was the end of the moral authority. So the U.S. had moral authority for about 8 seconds. To continue from the article, Israel is now breaking U.S. laws circumscribing the use of American-made armaments. It is in breach of multiple UN Security Council resolutions, and nobody in the U.S. says anything about it. I'm sure he means nobody in the ruling elite / the mainstream media. It is the rest of the world that is beginning to speak up. I put it this way: we watch as the age of hegemonic hypocrisy, as I propose to call it, draws to a close. And, this goes along very much with what I've been covering for months and months, saying that the proxy war in Ukraine is the beginning of the end of U.S. hegemonic rule. We are seeing a great splitting of the world's economy, with Russia and China, the two biggest on one side, and the U.S. and, Canada, UK, etc. on the other. And that is the beginning of the end for America. The idea that the United States owns the world and will coup or have economic war or full-on war against any country that goes against it. And by going against it, we mean as small as not wanting to do business in dollars. The U.S. And the other thing that the proxy war proved was that much of the world, in fact, 80% of the world's population, has not sided with the United States in the proxy war against Russia, in the proxy war in Ukraine. 80% of the billions of people on this planet live in countries that have not signed on to the U.S., sanctions against or war against Russia. Now, that doesn't mean all of them have thrown their lot in with Russia in the proxy war, but it means they have not given in to U.S. pressure, which shows the waning power of America. But I do think what we're witnessing right now, the horrors of this genocide in Gaza, is very well, 10, 20 years from now, we may point to this moment and say that was it. That was the end of the U.S., the age of U.S. hegemonic hypocrisy. To continue from the article, the Russia-China relationship now stops just short of a formal alliance and is the linchpin, or one of them, of what the Chinese especially now regularly refer to as the New World Order. This is the multipolar order. The U.S. proves in this way a brilliant, if perverse, catalyst in the welcome ruination of its century. And, this is, again, something that many of us have been repeating, or many of us have been saying about the proxy war in Ukraine, which is, although it was by the U.S.'s design, the U.S. ruling elite created it, even if some of them were opposed to it, like even Kissinger. But the U.S. ruling elite created that proxy war, and it has proven to be the undoing of the American century. Now, obviously, the American century has spanned, half in the 1900s and half in the 2000s. But the article says, and its unqualified support for Israel's daily spree of murder, starvation, and dehydration in Gaza is of a piece with this. PIECE, for those of you listening to the podcast. We now have the Chinese preparing, by all appearances, to play a diplomatic role in the search for a settlement. We have Iran and Saudi Arabia summiting to determine a common course of action in response to the Gaza crisis. We have Turkey militantly denouncing Israel and talking to Iran after long, long years of animosity between Turkey and Iran. We have a goodly number of America's friends pulling the plug on their relations with Tel Aviv. It was evident years ago, when America's preeminence began to come apart, that the U.S. could find its way into a new era creatively, imaginatively, wisely, courageously, and may I add, diplomatically, or, that's one option, or stupidly and violently, a vicious defender of its own lost cause. Gaza is what the wrong choice looks like. And it's so starkly the wrong choice. It is so starkly a clear choice of genocide over diplomacy and genocide over a welcome multipolar world, that it is signaling to the rest of the world that Israel and the U.S., which are really one and the same, are flailing, and desperate, and the moral authority is long gone. The propaganda, very few believe it anymore. For the first time in U.S. history, or I guess more accurately in Israel's history, the Democrats in this country, people who self-identify as Democrats, are siding with Palestinians, meaning more of them believe in the Palestinian cause than in the apartheid state of Israel. And you have vast changes amongst independents as well, even though I think independents still are slightly more for Israel's apartheid regime than for Palestinians. Finally, he concludes, when I watch the gruesome video footage from Gaza, I think of the people I see as actors in history. They suffer, in effect, for the sins of those who purport to lead us. Their suffering is turning history's wheel. We will owe them much for this as the order they too stand for comes into being. And, I think he put it a bit lightly there to say we will owe them much. We owe them, more than anyone can give them, because many of them have lost their lives, and in this pursuit, in this shift, in this global change that we're seeing take place. But that, if there's any positive, if it's possible to get a positive out of genocide, which it's not, but if there's any kind of silver lining in genocide, which is a sentence I was hoping I'd never have to say, it's that this really does seem to be a clear hinge in history, not a Stonehenge, but a just regular hinge, just a door, just a regular, like a metal hinge, but for history. So a place that history can close and fold and change. Not Stonehenge. I mean, I don't know what they were up to. Stonehenge, the people that made Stonehenge, they might have thought they were creating a hinge in history. Maybe they were trying to open up a hinge. All right, but so along this same topic, I got to bring you this video. It's like a 10-second video. Many of you may have seen it because it is running around the internet. But I will bring you this video of Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, 10 seconds that says everything. And it's just his facial expression as Joe Biden, in his senile, demented brain, calls President Xi of China a dictator again. He just did it yesterday. Now, many of you may remember that several months ago, when the U.S. was really harping on the anti-China, we're going to create a new Cold War with China boat, harping on the boat. Yeah, that is one of the worst mixed metaphors I've ever heard. When they were harping on the boat, when they were on the boat, for mixed metaphors, it was all anti-China, right? It was China's going to get us. China's sending balloons across our sky to spy on us. They're going to balloon us to death. All of that stuff, just so anti-China. And obviously it went along with all of Trump's anti-China stuff. So again, this is not Democrats or Republican. They are two cheeks of the same backside, as George Galloway says. But it was so anti-China that Biden got into calling President Xi of China a dictator. And it was incredibly offensive to Chinese people, to the Chinese ruling elite, etc. And now you have President Xi coming to China. He was just in San Francisco. Biden meets with him. They apparently have a very good meeting that has been months in the making, of basically the U.S. realizing that the U.S. is no longer the owner of the world. And they really, and this means the ruling elite, this means corporations, everything are in the position that they need China. They need to keep working with China. I mean, just to use one example, 1/5 of Apple's sales are in China. Okay. I was over in China for 4 days several months ago. You guys might remember the video I did about that. And it's American corporations all over the place. There's Teslas, there's Starbucks, there's so many American cars. All of that they need. But beyond that, China owns a great deal of U.S. debt, which if they call for all of it to be paid off, the U.S. would be fracked, royally fracked. And so you guys would prefer President Xi? Is that how you want me to say it? Sorry, I'm never good with pronunciation of anything. But and so the U.S. needs China more than China needs the U.S. China's just gotten too powerful, too big, economically too huge, population too huge, and China is not destroying nations around the world the way the U.S. has. So they need China. And apparently enough of the U.S. ruling elite have realized this, that they have backed off at least a little on their anti-China rhetoric. You don't hear a lot about the so-called genocide against the Uyghurs that has involved zero killing. You know, one of those genocides, the zero killing genocide. So they've realized this, and so that's what this meeting was about. It was about trying to get the United States back in kind of the good graces of China, and we can work together. And apparently, they're sending our pandas back, or their pandas back, because they just took them. The pandas just left. Like literally, I live in Baltimore. Like 2 weeks ago, there was a big advertising campaign about it. It was the last days in Washington D.C. to see the panda. Well, he's going to be back on the boat any minute to get the pandas back, but. So they do all of this, and then here is what Biden does in the press conference, essentially immediately after. And the key, and I'm sorry for those of you watching the podcast because I can't do it justice, the key is to watch Antony Blinken's face as this happens.
Mr. President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is the guy who runs a country that is a communist country that is based on a form of government totally different than ours.
Mr. President.
So for those of you listening to the podcast, which if any of you like podcasts, it's called The Lee Camp Show. Biden says, look, he is a dictator because their country is communist, which communist does not equal dictator. But anyway, and you see Antony Blinken's face like he just swallowed a turd. Like, oh, like, because you got to understand that these people, especially Blinken, their job all day long is to run around and try and control Joe Biden's idiocy. Just try and put him out when they have to, put him out in front of the cameras. And they try to not put him out in front of but when they have to, you know, not to wipe the pudding off his chin and, you know, try and get his underwear on the inside of the pants. And then they push him out on the stage and they just pray he doesn't say the stupidest shit you can imagine. And then, of course, he walks out there. He's like, look, he is a dictator. And Blinken looks like he has swallowed a massive turd because that sentence undoes all the work they've been doing for several months to try and get back in a relationship with China. I'll show it for those of you watching. I'll show it one more time.
Mr. President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is the guy who runs a country that is a communist country that is based on a form of government totally different than ours.
Mr. President, after.
By the way, you'll notice that you won't hear them call the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia a dictator. You won't, even though there's zero democracy. China actually does have voting, and the way George Galloway described it, he was in China with me at the forum, and he spoke. I spoke as well, but he spoke at the full forum. I was in like an offshoot thing, but. And the way he described it is that in China, you actually can, in your city, vote. The people can vote and actually change the policies. Like there are cities in China that have very different policies from other cities in China. Whereas the way it works in the U.S. is you can change the parties, but you can never change the policies. So in the U.S., we have this faux democracy where we pretend we're changing back and forth between the parties and the policies never change. In China, they have one party, really. I mean, you can't elect a different party, but you actually can change the policies. So, make of that what you will. But I just realized what Blinken looks like there. He looks like it's not quite swallow a turd. He looks like, because it's more abrupt than that. I feel like when you swallow a turd, you probably start to realize that something's not right, and it's like slower. His is really abrupt as he hears the word, look, he is, as Biden says that. And so I realized it's like he got his dick caught in his fly. That's what that face was. It was Blinken got the old member caught in his zippery zip. All right. I think that's what we just saw. And it shows you can't control a senile old man when you put him in front of cameras and you ask him to speak. It never goes well. All right, I got it. Okay, I'm running out of time, but so hold on. First, I want to bring you this, and then I will bring you this stuff about the cover-up concerning the assassination or killing of JFK's well-known mistress, Mary Meyer. Oh, and but I also got to bring you something about Tulsi Gabbard and how horrific she is and propaganda. That's coming right now. But all the rest of this is going to be at rumble.com/Lee Camp. It is free to watch there. Rumble.com/Lee Camp. Free to watch there. You can also watch on my locals page, leecamp.net. But if you need the free version, that is rumble.com/Lee Camp. All of this is coming right now. This insanity from Tulsi Gabbard, as well as I'll summarize the assassination of JFK's mistress and what it means. This is 60 years after JFK was assassinated. Okay, all of that. Rumble.com/Lee Camp. Join me over there. Why would you not? Why would you not? We're going to continue. And if you're at Rumble right now, then you don't have to change anything. And by the way, if you want all my stuff, like you get my podcast, my book, all that stuff, go to linktree.com/Lee Camp. Linktree.com/Lee Camp. And you can find everything there because it's too much to list. I have an ebook you can grab. I have my community at Locals. I have podcasts. All linktree.com/Lee Camp. And thank you, all of you who are locals. You make this show possible. You are the only way I'm able to keep this show going.